The movie begins many years ago in the Kingdom of Aragon, where a small village is shown. In this village, a gardener's family welcomes a newborn child into the world. The midwife carefully examines the baby and notices something unusual, a mark of great fortune on the child's body. She tells the parents, "This child is incredibly lucky. Fortune will always favor him, protecting him from every danger and misfortune." Hearing this, the parents are overjoyed. They excitedly ask the midwife, "Is this really true?" The midwife smiles and says, "Yes, not only is he lucky, but one day he will even marry a princess." As the midwife steps out of the house, she shares this news with some village women, and like wildfire, the rumor spreads throughout the entire village. Meanwhile, a royal spy passing through the village overhears this astonishing news. Sensing its importance, he immediately sets off towards the royal palace to inform the king. In the next scene, the grand royal palace is revealed, where King Michael is seen deep in his secret laboratory. For many years, he has been obsessed with a single goal: creating gold through alchemy. Just then, the royal spy arrives at the palace and delivers the message about the lucky child to the minister. The minister, realizing the significance of this information, rushes to the king's laboratory. As the minister enters, he finds King Michael completely absorbed in his research. The king, without even looking up, speaks. "From ancient Greece to Egypt, great civilizations once possessed the secret art of transforming metals into gold. I have abandoned everything to unlock this mystery." This, King Michael sighs in frustration, staring at his failed experiment. "Why do my attempts always end in failure?" he mutters. The minister, standing nearby, hesitates before replying, "I do not know, Your Majesty." Just then, Princess Isabel, the king's only daughter, enters the room. Her mother had passed away long ago, and since her father spent most of his time obsessed with his research, Isabel grew up feeling lonely. She walks up to the king, her innocent eyes filled with longing. "Father, will you play with me?" she asks softly. King Michael picks her up in his arms and gently smiles. "Once I discover the secret to creating gold, I promise to spend more time with you." The minister clears his throat, bringing urgent news. "Your Majesty, according to the royal spy's report, a child has been born in the village, a child blessed with immense fortune. The prophecy says he will grow up to marry the princess." The king's eyes widen in shock. A mere gardener's son, destined to marry his daughter? Without wasting a moment, he mounts his horse and sets off towards the village, the minister riding alongside him. Upon reaching the gardener's house, the king carefully observes the child. He then turns to the boy's father and declares, "If this child is truly so fortunate, then he must receive a proper upbringing and education. He deserves to be raised in the royal palace." The gardener and his wife hesitate. They do not want to part with their child. Sensing their reluctance, the king speaks again. "I, too, have a daughter. He will grow up alongside her, under the best care and protection." Hearing this, the gardener's wife turns to her husband, her heart filled with mixed emotions. "Perhaps this is the destiny of our lucky child," she whispers. With heavy hearts, they finally hand over their child to the king. In return, the king gives them a small pouch of silver coins, a token of compensation, though nothing could truly replace their beloved son. With the child in his arms, the king and his minister leave the village, heading back towards the palace. But on their way, they stop near a waterfall deep within the forest. As the sound of rushing water fills the air, the king looks down at the child with cold eyes. Without hesitation, he places the baby, still in its basket, into the river. How dare people even imagine that a gardener's son would one day marry my only daughter? The king scoffs. Now neither will he grow up, nor will he survive. Without a second thought, he turns away and rides back to his palace, unaware that fate has different plans. Meanwhile, the basket carrying the baby drifts down the river, traveling far away to another distant village. There, on the riverbank, a blacksmith's wife is busy washing clothes when she hears the faint cries of a child. Curious, she steps into the water and spots a basket floating downstream. Her heart pounds as she rushes to retrieve it. Lifting the baby into her arms, she looks around in shock. She takes the child home, where her husband, the blacksmith, asks in surprise, "Whose child is this?" With tears in her eyes, she replies, "Someone abandoned him in the river. For years, we have prayed for a child, and today the gods have answered our prayers. From now on, he will be ours." Hearing this, the blacksmith smiles and nods, embracing both his wife and the child. They decide to name him Ron Years Pass, and Ron grows up in the blacksmith's village. He quickly becomes a beloved part of the community, known for his charm, intelligence, and kindness. One day, a wandering violinist arrives in the village, playing a mesmerizing tune. Ron watches in awe, fascinated by the beautiful sound. Determined to learn, he eagerly picks up the violin and begins practicing. As the years go by, Ron not only becomes a skilled violinist, but also earns the admiration of everyone around him. His music brings joy to the village, and his cheerful nature makes him loved by all. In the Grand Royal Palace, Princess Isabel has also grown into a beautiful young woman. But despite the passage of time, King Michael remains obsessed with his unending quest to create gold. He neglects his daughter, his people, and even his own kingdom, pouring all his time into failed experiments. One day, the minister approaches him with urgent news. "Your Majesty, there is an ancient book on alchemy in a neighboring kingdom. It holds knowledge from the Greek civilization. Perhaps it contains the secret you seek." The moment the king hears this, his eyes light up with greed. Wasting no time, he mounts his horse alongside his minister and sets off on a new journey, unaware that fate is about to bring his past back to him. The scene shifts to Ron's village, where a grand celebration is taking place. The air is filled with joy and laughter as Ron plays the violin, his mesmerizing tune making everyone dance in delight. Meanwhile, King Michael and his minister are traveling through the countryside in search of the ancient alchemy book. But as they pass near Ron's village, the sky suddenly darkens and heavy rain begins to pour. Looking for shelter, the king unknowingly steps into the very house where the celebration is happening. The moment he enters, the villagers stop dancing and fall silent, their eyes filled with awe and respect. However, one person continues playing. Ron, completely lost in his music, unaware of the king's presence. It's only when his father nudges him and whispers, "That is the king," that Ron stops and bows in greeting. Intrigued, the king looks at Ron and asks, "Where did you learn to play the violin so beautifully?" Before Ron can answer, his father proudly steps forward and says, "He taught himself. No one ever trained him." Hearing this, Ron smiles and adds, "My mother found me in the river 20 years ago, but my parents have always loved me like their own." The blacksmith nods and says, "He was lucky that nothing harmed him in the river that day." Hearing this, the king and his minister freeze. A chill runs down the king's spine as realization dawns upon him. This was the same child. The child he had abandoned in the river 2 decades ago. His throat goes dry, his mind racing. He quickly gulps down some water and composes himself before turning to Ron. In 2 days, we will be celebrating the princess's birthday. The king says, I will be away on royal business, but I would like you to come to the palace for the celebration. The king smiles and looks at Ron. You must play your violin at the palace. The princess will love it, he says. Ron hesitates. But I am just a blacksmith's son. Without you there, the guards won't even let me inside the palace. The king chuckles, takes a parchment, and writes a royal decree. He stamps it with his royal seal, rolls it up, and hands it to Ron. Show this letter at the palace gates, and they will let you in without question. Satisfied, the king mounts his horse and sets off with his minister to retrieve the ancient alchemy book. Now, it's time for Ron's journey to the palace. He embraces his parents, takes his violin, and sets off on his first ever journey to the royal kingdom. As Ron walks through the dense forest, the sky begins to darken. He has never traveled this far before, and the unfamiliar paths confuse him. The deeper he goes, the more twisted the trees become, and soon he loses his way. Meanwhile, in another part of the same forest, a group of rebels is gathered around a campfire. They have been hiding in the jungle, planning their next move against the king's soldiers. One of them speaks urgently. The king's men are everywhere. We need to find a safer place before they catch us. Just then, Ron stumbles into their camp. The rebels instantly grab their weapons, their eyes filled with suspicion. Who are you? And what are you doing here? One of them demands. Ron, startled by their aggression, raises his hands in surrender and calmly replies, I was on my way to the royal palace, but I got lost in the forest. I was just looking for a safe place to rest until morning. The moment he mentions the palace, the rebels draw their swords, their faces dark with anger. Ron quickly clarifies, I am not the king's ally. I am not his relative or friend. He only invited me to play the violin at the princess's birthday celebration. Hearing this, the rebel leader signals his men to lower their weapons. He steps forward, his eyes narrowing. We are rebels! I'm sure you've heard about us, he says, his voice filled with mystery. Ron listens carefully as the rebel leader speaks, his voice filled with anger. That greedy king only cares about his obsession with gold. He wastes the kingdom's wealth on his useless experiments, while his people suffer in poverty. We want to remove him from the throne. Ron, taken aback, replies, I didn't know any of this. The leader nods. You can stay here for the night, but we will keep a close watch on you. Without taking any risks, the rebels tie Ron to a tree near their tents and confiscate the king's letter. Later that night, the rebel leader and his men open the letter and begin reading it. As their eyes scan the words, their faces darken with shock and fury. The letter contains a deadly order from the king himself. The moment this boy reaches the palace gates, kill him immediately. Anyone who disobeys this order will be punished. The rebel leader clenches his fists. This poor boy was walking straight into his own death. He didn't even read the letter. One of the rebels growls. We must teach that wicked king a lesson. The leader nods. Yes, this is the perfect opportunity. Determined to turn the tables on the king, the rebel leader goes inside his tent and begins forging a new letter, one that perfectly mimics the king's handwriting. After carefully copying every word, he stamps the new letter with a seal identical to the king's. Once done, he wraps it exactly as the original letter was. making sure Ron would never suspect a thing. Determined to turn the tables on the king, the rebel leader goes inside his tent and begins forging a new letter, one that perfectly mimics the king's handwriting. After carefully copying every word, he stamps the new letter with a seal identical to the king's. Once done, he wraps it exactly as the original letter was, making sure Ron would never suspect a thing. By dawn, Ron wakes up, still unaware of what had happened overnight. The rebels untie him and hand him back the forged letter. "Here's your letter. Now, go to the palace and play your violin." The priest looks at Ron and asks, "Do you accept the princess as your wife?" Ron, who had already fallen for the princess at first sight, replies, "Yes, I do, but only if the princess agrees. I don't want to force her." The priest nods. "Very well. With this, the wedding is complete. Now, as the final ritual, you both must seal your bond with a kiss." Ron, his heart racing, leans in towards the princess, hoping for a magical moment. But before he can get close, the princess glares at him in disgust and sneers. "I wouldn't even spit on you, let alone kiss you." Ron freezes, his excitement crushed. His eyes drop in disappointment as he realizes that despite the marriage, the princess despises him. Feeling humiliated and heartbroken, Ron silently leaves the royal hall. As he walks through the palace corridors, his mind is filled with confusion and sadness. Just as Ron steps into the hallway, he sees something that makes his heart stop. The king and his minister have returned to the palace, carrying the ancient alchemy book. Panicked, Ron quickly hides behind a pillar, watching the king pass by. If the king sees him, what will he do? The king and his minister head straight to the royal laboratory, eager to unlock the secrets of gold making. Meanwhile, the priest enters the laboratory, requesting an urgent meeting. "Your Majesty, I need to inform you of something important," the priest begins. But the king is too engrossed in his book. As he flips through the pages, his eyes suddenly widen in excitement. "I have found it!" the king exclaims. "The secret to creating gold!" The minister steps forward, curious. "What does it say, Your Majesty?" The king's lips curl into a wicked smile. "To create pure gold, I need 3 golden hairs from the devil himself." Hearing this, the priest gasps in horror. "Your Majesty, this is blasphemy. You are now willing to use dark demonic powers for gold?" The king scoffs. "There is no right or wrong. There is only power." The priest, disgusted, shakes his head. "I did not come here to discuss this. I came to tell you that I have performed a royal wedding. Your daughter has been married to the blacksmith's son." The king's face turns pale, then quickly twists into rage. "What nonsense are you speaking?" he roars. Hearing the priest's words, the king's face turns red with fury. He slams his fist on the table, his voice thundering across the chamber. "How dare you! You claim that I wrote this letter? That I ordered my daughter to marry a commoner?" The priest bows his head. "Your Majesty, the letter carried your seal and was written in your own handwriting. I merely followed your command." The king's hands clench into fists, rage boiling inside him. He immediately summons Ron to his chambers. As soon as Ron enters the room, the king glares at him with piercing eyes. "You forged a fake letter to trick your way into marrying my daughter," the king accuses. "For this crime, you will face severe punishment." Ron, shocked and confused, quickly defends himself. "Your Majesty, I wrote no such letter. But now that I am married to the princess, I want you to know I truly love her." Hearing this, the king's anger intensifies. His veins bulge with rage. But instead of ordering Ron's immediate execution, a sinister plan forms in his mind. He smirks and leans back on his throne. If you truly wish for this marriage to be accepted, if you really want my daughter to be your wife, then you must prove yourself. Ron looks at him with determination. How, Your Majesty? The king's smirk deepens as he says, You must bring me 3 golden hairs from the devil himself. Ron's eyes widen in shock. 3 golden hairs? From the devil? That means I have to go to hell itself. No one who enters ever returns? The king leans forward, his voice mocking. Your real parents once claimed that you are the luckiest child ever born. Now is the time to test your fate. Hearing this, Ron's heart races. But then a thought crosses his mind. How does the king know about my real parents? He hesitates before asking, Do you know who my real parents are? The king's lips curl into a cruel smile. He nods and lies. Yes, they sold you for a handful of silver coins. The words strike Ron like a thunderbolt. His eyes fill with pain, his heart breaking at the thought that his real parents abandoned him for mere money. With a heavy heart and a clouded mind, Ron silently accepts the deadly challenge. The next morning, he prepares for his journey to hell, a journey no man has ever returned from. That night, Ron stays in the palace, knowing that tomorrow he will set off on a journey to hell, a journey from which no man has ever returned. Sitting alone in the dimly lit palace gardens, he picks up his violin and begins to play a sorrowful melody, pouring all his pain and despair into the music. Standing by her balcony window, Princess Isabel hears the melancholic tune and feels a strange sadness in her heart. She steps forward and calls out to him, If you are happy with this marriage, then why are you playing such a sad tune? Ron looks up at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. Because my heart is broken. Tomorrow the king is sending me away, and I may never return. The princess's heart sinks. Where is he sending you? She asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Ron forces a weak smile. Wherever he wishes, it doesn't matter anymore. There's no happiness left in me. No love. And now, you're also free from this forced marriage. Hearing this, Isabel feels an unfamiliar pain in her chest. For the first time, she is worried for Ron. Determined to find the truth, Isabel rushes to her father's chambers. Where are you sending him? She demands. The king, seated on his throne, smirks. To fetch the 3 golden hairs of the devil, Isabel gasps in horror. You're sending him to his death. Your greed for gold has blinded you. The king narrows his eyes. That man tricked his way into marrying you. He forged a letter and deceived me, and I will have my gold, no matter what. But he is a good man, Isabel protests. He doesn't deserve this. The king scoffs. That doesn't matter. He must go. The next morning, Ron sets off on his journey to hell, leaving the palace gates behind. But shortly after his departure, Princess Isabel makes a bold decision. Disguising herself as a man, she dons a traveler's cloak, mounts a horse, and secretly rides out of the palace, determined to follow Ron and save him from his fate. Just as she reaches the gates, the king spots her and immediately blocks her path. Where do you think you're going in this disguise? He asks, his voice laced with suspicion. Without hesitation, Isabel glares at him and declares, You are sending an innocent man to die. I am going to save him. The king's face twists with rage. He snatches Ron's violin from her hands and smashes it against the ground. The violin shatters into pieces. Isabel stares in shock, her fists clenching in anger. For the first time in her life, she truly sees the monster her father has become. Her eyes burn with fury as she glares at him and says, hearing her father's cruelty, Princess Isabel's eyes burn with fury. She steps forward, glaring at the king with unwavering defiance. From this moment on, you are no longer my father. The king's expression darkens, but before he can react, Isabel mounts her horse and rides away, leaving the palace and her past behind. Meanwhile, Ron is wandering through unfamiliar lands, struggling to find his way to hell. But no matter how many people he asks, no one knows the way. Some laugh, some call him crazy, and others warn him never to go there. As he continues his journey, exhausted and hungry, he suddenly meets a traveler on the road, a mysterious person in a hooded cloak, sitting near a tree with food laid out. The traveler looks up and smiles, offering him food. You look tired. If you're hungry, you can eat with me. Ron hesitates, then shakes his head. But I have nothing to give you in return. Not even a single coin. The traveler laughs softly. I don't need anything in return. Feeling grateful, Ron sits beside the traveler and starts eating. As they share the meal, the traveler casually asks, "Who are you? And where are you going?" Ron sighs. The king has ordered me to travel to hell. If I don't go, my family will be punished. Hearing this, the traveler pauses for a moment, then replies, I'm a hunter. I explore dangerous places. And by coincidence, I too want to visit hell. Few people have ever made it there alive, and I wish to be one of them. Ron looks at them in surprise. You would come with me? The traveler nods. Yes, but do you even know the way? Ron lowers his head. No, I have no idea where it is. The traveler smiles knowingly. Then we should head to a village called Wales. There, we might find some answers. With renewed determination, Ron and the traveler mount their horse and set off toward Wales village. As they ride across the vast landscapes, Ron remains unaware that the traveler beside him is none other than Princess Isabel, disguised to protect him. After hours of riding, they finally reach Wales, but something is strange. As they step into the village, they see something shocking. As Ron and the disguised Princess Isabel step into Wales village, a chilling silence fills the air. The once lively village now stands abandoned with empty streets and broken homes. Near a dry well, they spot a lone woman sitting with her child, the only remaining soul in the village. Isabel approaches her. Where is everyone? Why is this village so empty? The woman sighs heavily, sadness in her eyes. This well once provided sweet, fresh water to the entire village, but one day it mysteriously dried up, and life here became unbearable. Without water, the people had no choice but to leave. Now only I remain. Hearing this, Isabel's heart fills with sympathy. When we return, we will find a way to help your village. Then she asks, but can you tell us the way to hell? The woman shakes her head. I do not know the way. But if you travel east from here, you will find a golden apple tree. A wise old man lives there. They say he once journeyed to hell and returned. Hearing this, Ron and Isabel exchange glances. Without wasting any time, they mount their horse once again and ride toward the east, following the woman's guidance. After traveling for some time, the two decide to take a short rest under a tree. As they sit by the campfire, Isabel, still disguised, turns to Ron and asks casually, Tell me, what kind of person is the princess? The one whose father sent you to hell? Ron sighs and shakes his head. She is arrogant and selfish. Hearing this, Isabel feels a deep sting in her heart. She lowers her eyes, unable to respond. She silently gets off the horse, walking a few steps away to hide her emotions. After composing herself, she turns back and forces a smile, asking, "Then, you must hate her?" Ron pauses for a moment, then looks at the sky and says, "No, I don't hate her." Isabel's heart pounds. "In fact, I like her," Ron admits softly. "I think I have fallen in love with her." Hearing these words, Isabel's eyes widen in surprise. A warm feeling spreads through her chest. For the first time, she realizes she has fallen in love with Ron too. Even after hearing Ron's feelings, Isabel chooses to keep her true identity hidden. She knows that revealing the truth now might distract him from his journey. As they continue forward, they come across a group of villagers gathered around a dry, lifeless tree, deep in prayer. Curious, Ron dismounts his horse and approaches them. "Excuse me, we are looking for the golden apple tree. Do you know where it is?" One of the men sighs and points at the withered, dead tree in front of them. "This is the golden apple tree, but it has been cursed by an evil force, and now it has dried up. We are praying for its revival." Ron exchanges a glance with Isabel. "We were told that a wise man here knows the way to hell." At these words, a frail old man steps forward, his eyes filled with experience and caution. "I know the path," he says, "but no one who enters hell has ever returned." Ron asks, "Then how did you survive?" The old man shakes his head. "I was lucky. I never stepped inside. But if you truly wish to go, there is only one way." He gestures toward the forest. "Go straight ahead and you will find a massive oak tree standing alone in the heart of the jungle. There, you will see 6 paths leading in different directions. But the real path to hell is the 7th path, hidden from the eyes of ordinary men." Ron nods, absorbing the information. "How do we find this hidden path?" The old man shrugs. "That I cannot tell you, but if fate is on your side, you will find it." With renewed determination, Ron and Isabel set off again, deeper into the forest. After hours of traveling, they finally reach the massive oak tree standing in the middle of a clearing. Just as the old man described, 6 clear paths stretch out before them, but there is no sign of a 7th path. Ron furrows his brow. There has to be a way. Then, trusting his instincts, he climbs up the ancient oak tree, hoping to find a clue. As he ascends higher into the branches, a strange gust of wind rushes past him, and suddenly a hidden pathway reveals itself beneath the roots of the tree. The 7th path, the road to hell. As Ron climbs higher into the ancient oak tree, his foot suddenly slips. Before he can react, he tumbles down, sliding through a hidden hollow inside the tree. The world around him spins in darkness, and suddenly, he finds himself lying near the banks of a mysterious river. As Ron gets up and looks around, he realizes he has reached the legendary river that separates the world of humans from hell itself. Just then, Isabel arrives, having followed the same hidden passage. She rushes to Ron's side. Ron turns to her and says, "This river marks the boundary between our world and hell. Beyond this point, there is no turning back." Before they can say another word, a shadowy figure appears from the mist. A mysterious ferryman standing in a black boat. His ancient eyes glow faintly, and his face is expressionless as he slowly rows toward them. The boat stops near the shore, and the ferryman gestures silently toward Ron. Ron turns to Isabel and sighs. "My friend, I must go alone from here. The ferryman only takes one soul at a time." Isabel, still hiding her true identity, nods with difficulty. "Be careful." With one last glance at her, Ron steps onto the boat. The ferryman pushes off, and the boat begins to drift toward the dark gates of hell. As the boat glides across the eerie waters, Ron looks at the ferryman and asks, "How long have you been doing this?" The ferryman replies in a low voice, "Since eternity began. I have rowed lost souls across this river for ages, yet I can never be free." Ron's eyes narrow with concern. "Is there no way to break your curse?" The ferryman exhales deeply. "No one has ever returned from hell, and no one has ever cared to try." Ron clenches his fists. "If I find a way, I will try to set you free." The ferryman chuckles darkly. "Brave words, but no one comes back from where you were going." A few moments later, the boat reaches the other side, and the massive gates of a fiery cave stand before Ron. Without hesitation, he steps off the boat and enters the cavern. Inside, an enormous black fortress looms in the distance, the Palace of the Devil. As he moves forward, a tall, old woman with piercing eyes suddenly steps in his path. She looks at him with curiosity and asks, "Who are you? And how did you come here?" Ron bows respectfully and replies, "My name is Ron. I have come to meet the devil." Hearing this, the woman's eyes narrow in suspicion. "The devil is not here right now." She glances at a massive, ancient book resting on a stone pedestal. Flipping through its pages, she scans the list of souls that were supposed to enter hell today. Finally, she looks up and says, "Your name is not written here." Ron smiles slightly. "That's because I have come here of my own free will." The woman's eyes widen in shock. She steps closer, staring at him in disbelief. Only a fool would willingly walk into hell. Ron, standing before the devil's mother, takes a deep breath and explains, "To win the princess's hand and escape the king's wrath, I must bring back 3 golden hairs from the devil." Hearing this, the old woman's sharp eyes soften for a moment. "If you have come here for love, then perhaps I will help you," she says. But before she can say more, a thunderous sound echoes through the cavern. The devil himself enters, dragging someone behind him. To Ron's shock, the person in the devil's grip is Isabel. The devil throws Isabel to the ground and growls, "I found this one near the river of hell. Somehow she managed to enter this world." Ron barely holds back his reaction, watching from his hiding place as the devil's mother quickly intervenes. She steps forward and examines Isabel closely, then tilts her head and says, "This does not look like a man, but a woman." With that, she swiftly removes Isabel's hat, revealing her long, flowing hair. The devil smirks, reaching forward and ripping off her fake mustache. From inside the wooden chest where he is hiding, Ron watches in complete shock. "Isabel is the princess!" His heart pounds with joy, but before he can react, the devil suddenly grabs Isabel's throat, lifting her off the ground. As Isabel struggles, gasping for air, the devil's mother steps forward, raising her voice. "Stop! Killing is not your task!" The devil grits his teeth, but lowers Isabel to the ground, stepping back. The old woman glances at Ron's hiding place. She knows everything now. This is the very woman Ron loves. Still catching her breath, Isabel looks at the devil and boldly speaks. "A village's well has dried up, a golden apple tree has withered, and a ferryman has been cursed for eternity. All of this is your doing, isn't it?" The devil smirks. "You're smarter than I expected." He leans forward, his eyes glowing ominously. "Yes, it was I who cursed the well." The devil smirks, looking at Isabel with amusement. Yes, I cursed the village well. I placed a frog inside it that drank all the water, but no one knows. If they simply remove the frog, the well will be full again. Hearing this, Isabel narrows her eyes, sensing an opportunity. She leans in, pretending to be curious. And what about the golden apple tree and the cursed ferryman? Surely you did something similar to them. The devil chuckles darkly, falling right into her trap. Of course, I corrupted the top branches of the apple tree with pure evil. If someone simply cuts off the upper part, the tree will flourish again. As he speaks, his mother silently moves behind him, waiting for the perfect moment. With swift precision, she plucks 2 golden hairs from his head. The devil doesn't notice. He is too caught up in his arrogance. Still keeping his attention, Isabel asks one final question. And what about the ferryman? Why is he forever trapped on the river? The devil grins wickedly. Ah, that's the simplest one. The ferryman must pass his oars to someone with an evil heart. The moment that happens, he will be free. Hearing this, Isabel feels a flicker of hope, but then the devil smirks and steps closer. You are quite intelligent. In fact, I think I will keep you here. You can help me find a way to remove love from the world forever. He reaches for her hand, pulling her toward him. Just as he tries to sit her beside him, his eyes grow heavy. A wave of exhaustion washes over him, and he falls asleep. It's the perfect opportunity. The devil's mother rushes to Ron's hiding place, opening the chest and whispering urgently, "Now! Take this!" She plucks the final golden hair from the devil's head and hands it to Ron. But the moment she does, the devil's eyes snap open. The devil roars in anger, realizing what has happened. "Traitors!" he bellows, his voice shaking the entire cave. Without wasting a second, Ron grabs Isabel's hand, and they run as fast as they can toward the cavern's exit. The devil lunges after them, flames bursting around him. But just as he is about to catch them, his mother suddenly kicks him hard, sending him tumbling backward. Ron and Isabel take the chance to escape, rushing out of the cavern and into the darkness beyond. Breathless, they race toward the river where the ferryman is waiting. As Ron and Isabel reach the riverbank, they urgently call out to the ferryman, "Take us across!" The ferryman hesitates, gripping his oars tightly. "I have never taken anyone back before." Ron steps forward, his voice firm, yet hopeful. "If you take us across, we will tell you the secret to your freedom." For a moment, the ferryman remains silent. Then, he nods and gestures for them to step into the boat. As the boat drifts across the dark waters, the devil emerges from the cavern behind them, his eyes burning with rage. "Stop them!" he roars, flames erupting around him. The ferryman hears the devil's command, but for the first time in eternity, he does not obey. Instead, he rows faster, pushing the boat forward toward the opposite shore. As the devil disappears into the mist, Ron turns to the ferryman and says, "To break your curse, all you must do is hand the oars to a man with an evil heart. The moment he takes them, you will be free." The ferryman listens carefully, his eyes filled with newfound hope. Soon the boat reaches the other side, and Ron and Isabel step onto dry land, finally escaping hell. But before they can celebrate, a familiar voice echoes through the air. "You may have escaped the devil, but you will not escape me." They turn and see. The king smirks coldly. "Every time you have survived by sheer luck. But this time, I will kill you myself." Ron stands his ground, ready to fight. But before the king can strike, the ferryman suddenly steps forward. Without hesitation, He thrusts the oars into the king's hands, forcing him to grip them with both hands. In an instant, a dark force surrounds the king. His eyes widen in terror as his body transforms into the new ferryman. The former ferryman exhales deeply, his face filled with relief. I am free at last. The new ferryman, once a proud king, now stands in silent servitude, doomed to row souls across the river for eternity. Returning to the human world, Isabel shares the devil's secrets with the villagers. In the first village, the people remove the frog from the well, and fresh, sweet water flows once again. In the second village, the people cut off the corrupted branches of the golden apple tree, and within days, the tree blooms with golden fruit once more. At last, Ron and Isabel return to the royal palace, but this time not as prisoners, but as rulers. With the evil king gone, Ron is crowned as the rightful king, and Isabel stands beside him as his queen. Standing at the palace balcony, they take out the 3 golden hairs of the devil and release them into the wind. As the golden strands disappear into the sky, so does the memory of the evil that once controlled their fates. And so, the fantasy adventure comes to an end, proving that true luck is not in fortune, but in the strength of one's heart.